Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. You know, if you really want to win on the ideas, you probably shouldn't lead with an ad hominem attack. I struggle with that one a little bit, at least personally, but I still understand the concept. You gotta win on the merits, and so you shouldn't resort to just insulting people. And that got me thinking lately how I've heard many people refer to the concept of Trump derangement syndrome as an ad hominem attack, or as a catch-all term that's just used against any Trump critic. If you don't like Trump, then you have Trump derangement syndrome. They've of course tried to dismiss the claim as if it's just an insult, but I don't think that's what it was. I don't think it was an ad hominem attack. I think most of the time it was probably a pretty accurate diagnosis. And I think we're finally reaching a point in the public conversation, let's call it, where I guess we're being proven right. The whole accusation of Trump derangement syndrome was never an insult to dismiss the ideas of your opponent. No, people out there were actually very much Trump deranged. It was a real phenomenon, and we now essentially have confirmation as the leftoids themselves are basically admitting to it, that they were under a spell of hysteria, so to speak. We got another Anna Kasparian moment. It almost feels as though the internet has become Anna Kasparian's therapist at this point, but I guess she's got an admission of guilt that pretty much confirms exactly what we've been talking about. Let me show you guys exactly what I mean by that. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright, so here's a recent Anna Kasparian highlight. Take a look at this.
I think that politics has substituted religion to some extent. People have almost like this religious zealotry toward their political beliefs. And when that happens, it's really difficult to have a conversation with someone without it immediately devolving into allegations of bad faith, of, lying, deception, all sorts of things. And so maybe that's part of it. But honestly, I didn't really notice this as an issue in America until Donald Trump was running for president, and then after he got elected as president. And I am 1,000,000% guilty of honestly allowing him to kind of break my brain for a little bit, because I saw him as such a significant threat.
And basically the way I read that is that's a total admission of what we've been saying for years. She says that Trump broke her brain, but what she meant to say was she was suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, TDS, and she described it there to a T. You become so consumed by this overwhelming hatred and fear of a certain man with a golden blonde comb over, and of course that fear is constantly fed and fueled by the media's nonstop hysteria. Your judgment is therefore compromised, clouded, your perspective starts to warp, and you essentially become radicalized, part of some fanatical religious cult of, let's call it, political hatred. It's the exact behavior that we've seen from prominent figures like Rachel Maddow, for instance, who's built this entire identity around being victimized by Donald Trump, a man who's literally never done anything to harm her or her group's well-being.
He is demanding that the U.S. Senate shut itself down for him. There is no rational reason why he should not want the United States Senate to confirm his appointees unless he doesn't want the Senate to have that kind of job.
And yes, Trumpism is sometimes what we call it. MAGA movement is probably a better way to do it. But there is an authoritarian movement inside Republican politics that isn't being bamboozled by Trump. They are pushing Trump to get more and more extreme, because the more extreme things he says, the more they adhere to him. And that is coming from a very large proportion of the American right that adheres to the Republican Party.
He does not like elections. He does not like voting as a system by which we decide who's going to be the president. When he was running for re-election in 2020, the Republican Party decided they were no longer going to have a platform. They abolished their platform and said, our new platform is whatever Donald Trump wants, we're for that. And so he's trying to get rid of the American system of government. And that means getting rid of a government that does anything other than serve him. And that's what Project 2025 is all about. Trump and his movement, they are not running against Democrats. They're running against democracy.
I do want to be a dictator. I will root out the vermin amongst us, the Marxist, communist vermin. Immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. These things that Trump is saying right now, they sound familiar, not just because he's going for shock value, not just because he's going for the transgressive thrill of saying things that famous dictators and genocidal maniacs have said in the past. The reason these things sound familiar and he started to repeat them and started to make them part of his regular repertoire is because this stuff works.
I expect that it will be mass deportations. It will be millions of people in camps managed by the U.S. military. I expect it will be military raids in civilian areas. I think that it is a big, big leap toward the multipolar world that Vladimir Putin has been dreaming of and preaching for a long time. And I think internally in the United States, they will start arresting their enemies and bringing bogus prosecutions and Justice Department civil lawsuits against everybody who disagrees with them. I think all of that's going to happen.
You know, they've taken us to Cocoa Puff Town, essentially. And of course, we know what's crazy, what's unhinged is at the same time entertaining, and it's fun to laugh at, and people have certainly had their laughs over the last 8 or so years. You know, of course, we've had a good laugh. It's been easy to laugh at it. But the truth is, what's happening here is actually quite sad. People get so caught up in these media-driven false narratives. It's almost like living under a spell, living in an alternative reality where Donald Trump's always around the corner, like Chucky waiting to pounce. It's a delusion. People called it a syndrome. And now basically Anna Kasparian confirms it. That's exactly what it was. And whether or not I agree with her politically, I think she deserves full credit, especially for her candid nature and being honest about all this stuff. Despite the left-wing backlash and onslaught that she must be facing, you gotta give her credit. She's doing something that's pretty courageous. And what's especially interesting here now is her role as a voice for young women. You know, forever the Democrat Party has been heavily relying on dominating the female vote. It's a demographic that they almost take for granted, you'd say, assuming they'll always have the female vote locked down. But what I find particularly interesting, especially as we're witnessing the political evolution of Anna Kasparian, Tulsi Gabbard, and other figures, is whether or not we're going to see a broader trend form here. What happens if women, and particularly young women, start questioning the narrative just like these girls are, and some of them even go as far to start embracing Donald Trump, someone that they were almost culturally coached to despise? Well, this could possibly spell further doom for the Democrats. It's almost as if they're losing their most key demographic. I mean, if they lose women, who do they really have left? Then all of a sudden, everything falls apart, and they become the party of the Silicon billionaire and illegal immigrants. At that point, there's simply no real Democrat base. And that's why I find Anna's public moments of clarity here are so important, because it's not just about her. Each individual, in my view, always represents a segment of individuals that will show up on surveys. If Anna's feeling this way, it means there's all kinds of other women also feeling this way, and it's possible that that trend continues to grow. It just feels like, especially in this election, people are waking up. You know, to me, this is what waking up looks like, outside of the context of actually waking up in the morning and getting a coffee. You know, maybe, just maybe, we're witnessing the beginning of a much larger cultural shift here, and if that's happening, I mean, for the Democrats, that would be absolutely terrifying. If people are starting to break free from the emotional manipulation of the left, and of course breaking free of the groupthink that the left relies so heavily on, well then that may mean that the whole structure is essentially facing impending collapse. And at least to me, Anna Kasparian kind of represents that, and so maybe it's happening. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.